Well, I'm Chris Lindley, and I live in Paoli, Indiana. I also teach at Paoli Junior Senior High School. I've taught for 34 years there, and I teach, well, at the current moment, I teach U.S. history and U.S. government.
Hi, I'm Sean Steele. I live in Heltonville, Indiana, in Lawrence County, and currently I teach art at Bedford Middle School. Before that, I taught art at Olytic Middle School, and that combined was the last 8 years. Before that, I taught 22 years at Orleans Junior Senior High School, and as Mr. Lindley and I were kind of talking before film, we have to wear many hats. So at Orleans Junior High School, I taught eighth grade U.S. history, psychology, sociology, government, econ, and then went to teach junior U.S. history and also dual credit government. And coached seventh and eighth grade girls basketball and directed the senior play. So
Yep.
we do have to wear a lot of hats at rural schools.
Yep. So I have, for the last, 17 years, I've helped with plays. You mentioned that. So I've helped with the drama productions on that, assistant director of those, and sponsored the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. We had a guy retired. We had no games club anymore, and the kids wanted to play games. So I said, okay, I'll run the games club. And spent 25 years coaching academic Super Bowl. Finally gave that one up. I said, something has to go at some point. And then the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, I've done we do these half days where we have professional development, once a month, but the kids only come to school for half a day. So we decided, well, we'd like to do something that matters with those besides go to 20-minute class periods those morning. So I've started designing what those activities will be. And so what they gave me was, they said, okay, since you do that, you won't have to have a homeroom anymore. So that was my, I guess, advantage of taking that on. But sometimes it's as much work as having a homeroom.
Nice.
So you do have a lot of different hats because
Yeah.
rural schools are short-staffed. We keep shrinking in terms of both enrollment, although it's kind of holding steady right now, but it's shrunk from where it was like 10 or 15 years ago. And then, funding shrinks, teaching staff, instead of replacing people when they retire, sometimes that gets absorbed in and you end up teaching and doing other things other than what you originally did. So.
Yeah, for sure. That reminds me of a couple other duties I had. I was the senior sponsor at Orleans. I was the student council sponsor and organized the homecoming dance and the king and queen contest.
Oh, yeah.
I was assistant football coach at Paoli High School for a few years.
I remember that.
Two seasons, and I was assistant coach at Bedford Middle School up until this past year for 5 years, 6 years. It all gets kind of hard to when you mention stuff. I was like, oh yeah, I did.
Yeah, it does. The more you talk, the more of the stuff comes. Oh yeah, I used to do this, and I've done that. I did senior class sponsor a few years as well. Yeah, they're always coming and asking you if you'll do this or that, or you feel this sort of guilt when somebody is retiring or is left, and that is left hanging there. Well, who's going to take this up? Who's going to do that? Or it's kind of like when they come to you and say, we have a after school, what they call evening school, once a week, and for students who, of course, have disciplinary issues, and they're always looking for somebody to take the great spot of that 3-hour slot, on a Thursday evening. And so that was the very last one of the year, and I was like, nobody would take it. Nobody would take it. So you feel a little guilt, so, okay, I'll do it. Take your turn with this, do your, Plus, you try to, you want to go to a lot of your students' activities as well. So you got, of course, I'm a huge basketball nut. And so I've got to go support the kids there because I have all these juniors and seniors. I have every single one of them. So I want to go watch them play, and got to get to a girls basketball game, and I got football games and volleyball. And, you want to try to get to everything. Before you know it, time is taken up.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize that what you do in the classroom is only the more visible aspect of what you're doing. Because for every hour that you're in that classroom, you've got to think about the preparation that goes into it and the grading that comes after the fact. And I teach 3 college level courses, and there's quite a bit of extra work that comes with that. So
for sure.
So anyway, but the schools are kind of like they're the community center. I've watched when small towns in Indiana have lost their school and how the community just kind of starts to dry up. It doesn't have that central point anymore that pulls the people together, and then so you get a small town and maybe what they've got left is 2 or 3 churches and a couple businesses or whatever, and they don't have anything else to keep that, and that community just begins to wither. Mm-hmm. So I hate to see that. Of course, I'm a history teacher, and I love this town used to have this school, and that was what the mascots were called. Mm-hmm. Like Campbellsburg and Hardinsburg before they consolidated to become West Washington. You had the Hardinsburg Bearcats and the Campbellsburg Warriors. All these little towns had schools.
Yeah, B&L.
It's a consolidation of several.
So we had the Tunnelton Indians and the Shawswick Farmers and the Olytic Bearcats and I'm going to be remiss and forgetting all the other. Needmore Hilltoppers.
The Hilltoppers. The Hilltoppers. Fayetteville had. And Springville had a school. And yeah. Huron had
Fayetteville Lions. And, that's what they are now. But now those high schools that consolidated and were pushed into Bedford North Lawrence, they still had elementary schools. That was kind of a microcosm of what happened, what you're talking about of the town center and the hub of the community. And recently a lot of those elementary schools closed. So within Lawrence County we've consolidated more, and a lot of it probably needed to. Some of these outlying schools, our kids went to Heltonville, mm-hmm. and it was a great experience. And at that time when they went, the enrollment kind of justified that. But then when it got so low, part of it is understandable, but that caused a lot of hurt feelings and resentment within those pockets of the county that lost their. Now they lost their high school, and now they lost their elementary.
Even the elementary, school too. Yeah. Crawford went through some of that too. When they consolidated Crawford County as one high school in 1977, they left the elementaries at the former high schools: English, Marengo, Leavenworth. They all had their elementary school, Milltown, and then several years ago they decided to consolidate some of those in. They changed it to like West Crawford and South Crawford or whatever. Well, there went those old memories of those schools and those communities. Now that's gone too. It's just part of what's happening to rural Indiana is population changes and declining number of children available in those communities, and it's just we see everything migrating to the center of the state in lots of ways.
And with when Mitch Daniels was governor, and we had Dr. Tony Bennett mm-hmm. as what was the title?
He at that time was Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Yeah. There was a push to consolidate Orange County schools, mm-hmm. and to have possibly lost Paoli and Orleans and Springs Valley as because there was a pretty, I remember I was teaching in Orleans that time, a very real possibility that we were going to have a consolidated Orange County school, whatever they would call that. And that would be so sad to see happen. And, if things keep going like that, I think the only thing that schools are going to be able to do is to do that. And I don't want to see that, to see that rival, to see a home game at Orleans gym, a basketball game, and to see the community and the pep band and the town comes together. It is such a special thing.
Like the state championship thing. I mean, just what that did to that community, bringing everybody together. Yeah. Especially when Paoli plays Orleans, talk about a full gym.
Or the Orange Bowl when Springs Valley plays Paoli in
for football. Yes. But that's what I see the school as playing such a critical role in a community's identity. And yes, teachers in rural schools have to wear a lot of hats and stuff, but that's the price you pay for the benefit, I think, of getting a lot more opportunity with those students. I teach the same students 2 years in a row, so I really get an opportunity to know those kids in ways I might not if I was only teaching one grade level in some large school where you didn't even teach all. I teach every junior and every senior that walks through our school. So it gives you a chance to, I think, do a little more community building there with the students as well. So I see that as critical, and I know you're going to running for election to the state house and put that in that how important rural public education is, because it is a piece. And with today's technology, why do we need to consolidate schools into great big things? I mean, everything that is available to a big school is available to a small school now through the opportunity to use technology to bring stuff in this area. And I'm of the opinion that kids are less likely to get lost in a small school. There's going to be people that they're going to connect and know. I knew a guy that taught up at Lawrence Central up in Indianapolis, and he talked about a student who came in, and he had classes of over 30 kids every class period of the day. And he said they put this student in. He was obviously Hispanic and did not speak English. But the school was so overloaded with people, there was nobody to double check on this kid. And so, he did the best he could. Come to find out, the student had come from Guatemala, and he actually didn't even know Spanish. He was of a Mayan and spoke an indigenous Mayan language, but it took like a half a year to get to that point where they could find this out. Otherwise, this kid was just like roaming this school and didn't have any support at all. In a small school, that's not going to happen. That kid's going to be known.
Yeah.
That, we got a child here that needs something. There's going to be some teacher, some counselor, somebody, somebody's going to know.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other advantage of the small schools.
For sure. I miss that about teaching at a larger school. I love teaching art and I love my job, but seeing like you, I had the same crew of kids. We were kind of joking how I was the social studies department at Orleans High School, which I think the only social studies class in high school that I didn't teach was world geography. So I had all juniors for U.S. history, and I had all seniors for government and econ.
Right.
So I had those kids for 2 years, and some of those, the first few years that I taught, I had them as 8th graders, and then I had them again as juniors.
Yeah.
So you see them hopefully maturing and
Hopefully.
But
I taught world geography for a few years, and so I'd have mostly freshmen and sophomore took it. And then, boom, they popped back into junior U.S. history, and there was a turnover there for several years. I had the same kids over again. Yeah, it gives you such a chance to I guess, invest in them.
Yes.
So the issue, of course, is how to keep the public's awareness of how important public education is. I hear a lot of push, about charter schools and private schools and vouchers and stuff. But I'm like, a lot of people in a county like ours, that's not an option. Where are you going to go?
Yeah.
It just isn't. It isn't the option, and the schools are already established and have a structure in place to do this job. And I'm constantly on to our school about we don't sell ourselves enough. We have tremendous programs. I mean, you can get an associate's degree now at our school with the partnership with Ivy Tech, or you can do the Core 30 where you walk into college already as a sophomore. I mean, we've got these vocational programs. You can earn all these certificates in welding and automotive and nursing and I'm like, it's all available right there. And sometimes I think our communities don't understand just how much opportunity there is for their students as well, and that rural schools really are doing a good job at prepping students for the future.
An amazing job.
I think so.
I think so too.
I mean, I said I teach 3 college level courses, teach 2 sections for H101 and H102, which is the introductory history classes. I started teaching that in 2000 for IU, and then they switched me to Ivy Tech about 10 years ago. And then I teach AP Government, which is also Poli Sci 101 for Ivy Tech. So these kids are able to get college credit at our school, and we have lots of other classes as well. But that's been very rewarding too, to be able to teach some of those kind of courses for kids and give them a taste of the higher level work. Mm-hmm. In fact, this all came out of a chance conversation I had at the Centers for Rural Engagement conference a few weeks ago, where my students were invited to show some of their projects at the conference. Every year we do this, what we call a museum, night at the museum, and their final project in the second course is to build a 3-dimensional museum style exhibit, something that will interpret a piece of history to an audience. And I always tell them, I said, it's one thing for you to learn history, but we want you to do history. I want you to make it available to the public. And so we then show those at a public event. And several people had been there that were involved with the Centers for Rural Engagement. And they come back and they said, hey, we'd like to have your students show these one day at the conference. So we took about 10 of our best projects down there and set up. And I was talking to somebody and I saw this lady, and she was recording some of the students as they were making their presentations. And then she comes over, she wants to record me, and found out that was Michelle. And so that's how I got connected on the Indiana Rural Summit thing. And, we were talking about how it just showcased what rural schools are capable of doing. I mean, with a minimal budget, I can tell you it's a cardboard and duct tape budget to do these projects. These kids pull off some amazing exhibits. We had one on the Americans with Disabilities Act that she had some carpenters in her family help her. But I mean, she had the steps, she had the whole experience of what it's like to be somebody with a disability. She had Braille on it and everything. And it all developed from a story that she had read about a girl named Jennifer Keelan, who did back in 1990. It was called the Capitol Crawl, where they crawled up the steps to the U.S. Capitol. And she had cerebral palsy, and they told her, oh, don't do it, it's too much, you're just a kid. And she said, I'm going to crawl up these steps if it takes me all night. And the goal, of course, was to highlight what it's like, the lack of access for people with disabilities. And then Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. So here you had this whole experience that she had put together of that. And we had one on Karen Silkwood, who divulged a bunch of information about nuclear power and how it was not being handled correctly, and a very mysterious death in her case. And just a lot of stuff. The champion of the show was a young woman who took on the ideal of women's suffrage and how they used needlecraft in order to promote their campaign for the vote. And she liked needlecraft anyway, so it worked well for her. She sewed sashes and she made stuff to show in her exhibit. But it was just really hard hitting and very good history to show the feminization aspect of, they were still women, they were still doing traditional women, gendered occupation, but yet they were wanting the vote as well. And just, it was good stuff. And I think these kids in rural America can do just as good a stuff as the ones in the big suburban schools can do. They just need the resources.
Yeah. I just wanted to talk about how a basketball game in a rural community, just getting back to the heartbeat of the town, and the just that central location, and the bringing together the whole community in a basketball game in Orleans and Paoli and Springs Valley is an amazing thing to see. The pep band going, the whole community out. I mean, it would be a good time for a thief to be burglarizing houses, because the whole community is at that game, and it just literally packed, shoulder to shoulder people in the gym. And the atmosphere of that is something that you don't get at a larger school. And shout out to Orleans for winning the state championship a couple of years ago, and Coach Bradley and the Bulldogs.
Yeah.
But Orleans, when I taught, and I don't know the enrollment now, but I would say through 22 years of teaching in Orleans, our graduating class, I think the smallest was maybe 45 and the largest was maybe 70, and probably an average of 60 kids at Orleans. And for that size of school to be winning a state championship is pretty amazing.
Well, kind of like Paoli and the band, the Pride of Paoli. I mean, one of the winningest bands in the state of Indiana, and of course, my 3 children participated in the band, and I mean, when they would stay, even when they didn't win the actual championship, I think there's only been a couple of years that they didn't go to the state at all. And it's phenomenal that this is happening right here. And now we have students that have gone on and have done music education. One of them is a band director at Westfield, currently, another winning band, so the tradition goes on. But it's that community building that's a big part of what rural schools do when there is that school's in that community. It allows those people to come together for an event. It has a central, as you say, a central location. And it's all about supporting your team, and of course, but like you take a ball game between Paoli and Orleans, whether it's at Orleans or at Paoli, it's not that far apart. It's 8 miles. People are going to drive to both of those, and the place is going to be packed, and people are going to have a lot of conversations because they're all there. And that's such a place to and they're going to cross those lines. They're no, it's a small county anyway, but people are going to talk to people in Orleans and vice versa and stuff. And you're going to catch up with people on who is, what somebody's health is like, and what's going on over here, and what this church is doing and stuff. And you just can't, people talk about social media but it can't replace that sense of community that comes from that. And I'm not so sure if you consolidated and and pulled all these schools into one big, huge, monolithic school, that would achieve that purpose or not. Also, you got to think about the kids. When you got a small county like ours, and there are 3 high schools, you say, yeah, they Orleans graduated between 45 and 70 kids, and we usually graduate somewhere around 85 to 100, whatever. But think about your different sports events. That's 3 different groups playing basketball. If there was only one county school, then there's only going to be a few of those kids are going to be good enough to play basketball or a band or whatever. There's a lot more opportunity for kids to be involved in things. And sometimes, like the teacher wearing many hats, kids wear a lot of hats too. So we fight this battle in the spring. We want to do a spring drama production. Well, we've got kids that are going to play baseball and softball and run track conditioning, or they're doing the winter guard for they're doing everything. But think about what that experience gives for those kids. If you're in a larger school, you're only going to do one thing. Because you're not going to have that opportunity. They're not going to need you in those other areas. So that's another, I put that plug in for rural schools.
And I'm going to put the plug in for extracurriculars and for what we call related arts as well. Because as we were talking before, a lot of schools are dropping choral programs, band programs, art. At our middle school, we have dropped the choir teacher, and now the orchestra teacher has to teach, and she likes it, but that is out of necessity, not desire. I'm sure she loves teaching choir, but the funding wasn't when schools are squeezed, they have to make cuts somewhere.
Right.
And the cuts that are most commonly made are those non-essential classes that I now teach of it, and this is not selfish plug for art, but art and choir and band that are rich. Some kids, the main thing that they get out of school, and the thing that gets them there every day is the love of creating art and an art class. That's what they look most forward to. And I think it's a terrible thing that a lot of those programs are being phased out because...
Well, it's like theater. I mean, we do theater because Mrs. Wishart and I love that opportunity for students. But both of us are, on the downhill slide towards retirement at this point. And we're like, what happens when we no longer, will somebody pick this up and do this? And of course, the school doesn't actually really fund. I mean, we have to have drama club. There's no theater classes where kids can do the stuff during school. It all has to be done outside of school. But I see those kids come in there and they're not athletic, so they're not necessarily going to be in that, but this is their place. This is something that they can do and makes their school experience better. And sometimes it's a great opportunity to get those kids out of some of those, I don't know, we live in a very anxious generation of kids, and suddenly they found a place to belong. And again, there's those kids, and then there's just kids that they do a lot of different things. And you mix these kids up in these different settings, and they get to know each other. And that's community building too. Whereas you go to a large consolidated school and these kids are funneled into this one track, and the only people they're really around are just that group of people. That may be a self-reinforcement. Maybe that's part of our political polarization and cultural polarization issues. They're not, it's also the plug for rural America is that people have to interact with each other. They're just in these places where you're going to see each other at Walmart and you're going to be in the same churches. And, you have to do life together. And I think that changes where, social media isn't going to replace that, because social media allows people just to live in that environment that they want to be in. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that even happening in rural America too, where I just live vicariously through my online life, and I don't have to deal with my neighbors.
And part of the motivation for running for state office is just the frustration from being a teacher and seeing these things happen to our
Cuts.
schools and the cuts, and getting flyers from the incumbents saying how they raise funding for public education. Well, that might be true that there's a little bit of raise in funding,
But
but
where's
as
it
that
going?
as that tube that gets to us has many more holes poked into it, we end up getting less money from the public. And when the state took over the education fund, instead of it being local, there's a lot of discrepancy from rural schools and suburban and bigger schools. And
But it was supposedly designed to equalize that, wasn't it?
yes, it was. And then, so that's one of the first problems. And now, if you increase the funding, but by the time it gets to public education, when it gets out of the tube for vouchers and for, now SB1 has a very negligible tax impact on most people for the property taxes. They might, on an average, I've heard, save $150, maybe $200 a year on property taxes. So you could get a pizza every month for that. But in return, what we're losing in SB1 is going to cost North Lawrence schools $3 million over the next couple of years. For Orange County, I looked, and it's like over $1 million. As with the voucher system, more public education money going to super wealthy folks who don't need that money, that could afford to send their kids to private school on their own without that public money, but then essentially get subsidized for that.
For doing it.
For doing it. And they say, well, it's school choice, but it's not an equitable school choice, because public schools have to take everybody.
Right.
Public schools have to be accountable for the funds that they receive. Public schools have a school board run by local people that are making decisions. Public schools, when they say school choice, and yes, you have a choice, well, is that, let's say, $12,000 a year that this family is going to receive on their voucher, is that going to send their kid to, is that going to fully pay for that private school?
Right.
No, let's say the private school, this is just, I'm not very good at math, I'm a social studies teacher, but let's say private school is $25,000. A poor family can't come
It's
up
not enough
with the overage of that. So you're essentially giving families $15,000 that don't need it. And we've got, it just seems, when I keep on hearing school choice, I'm like, okay, if it's really school choice, let's make those schools that get that money, let's make that be their full tuition. Mm-hmm. That if you're getting $15,000, that $15,000 will send your kid to ABC Academy.
Right.
That, oh, we can't do that. Okay, well then it's not school choice. It's a false equivalency.
See.
Why I'm trying to run is not only to get the focus on fully funding public education, but to also get back to common sense and what's important. We have so many divisive issues pushed by these different groups that I don't know. I think there's, whether it's, and we can edit this out because I'm rambling, but I don't know whether to, name Alec as but so this is probably going. But a lot of these groups are pushing an agenda of divisive issues. Well, a few years ago there was the law, I forget, I think it was HB 1285, that a lawmaker in defending this was like, well, you need to teach both sides of the Holocaust, and you need to teach both sides, and was literally defending that on the state house floor of like
side of that.
that you can't teach divisive issues. You know, how are you going to be a history teacher?
Exactly. History is divisive just in and of itself.
Yeah, and
don't we have to have our students come to grips with, in an increasingly divisive world, don't they need the skills necessary to start navigating through that? Yeah, I remember those days. I said, I guess I'll just be fired if that's the case, because I can't teach American history without dealing with divisive issues.
That's what
because
American history is about.
The whole country, I mean, was founded on a divisive issue.
Yeah.
I mean, we are celebrating our 250th, and America was founded on a division.
Yeah, and as a history teacher, I see all these state policies kind of demonizing teachers and painting us as trying to indoctrinate our students. And a lot of our teaching government, a lot of students would be like, "Are you a Democrat or a Republican?" Because I
don't let them know any of that kind of stuff.
I didn't try to indoctrinate the students, but we're being demonized, and Senate Bill 202 is like the Eyes on Education portal, and turn your teacher in if you that is passed. And my opponent voted for Senate Bill 202 that encourages students and families to report their teacher if they think they're essentially too woke or pushing any kind of, agenda that family might not agree with. Indoctrinating the students. So we got, this Eyes on Education portal that Todd Rokita is pushing and to turn teachers in, and I want to get it back to common sense and to quit demonizing teachers.
To the era, when I grew up and my parents grew up, where teachers were highly respected community members. What happened to that? I mean, I remember as a young person that many teachers in our community were just seen as major community people and doing something that was very honorable. It was an honorable profession. And you looked up to these teachers. In fact, that's part of what made me want to become a teacher. I had some good teachers, and I remember the investment that they made in my life, and those became my role models. I had one. I just went to his 80th birthday celebration a few months ago, and I told him how much, because he had had a lot of doubts about his career and what it was all for. And my wife and I both had him as a teacher, and we both told him that you were one of the most significant teachers for us in the middle school era. What you did, that investment, he said, well, I'm glad to hear that. Because, and I'm thinking today we are not getting people into the teaching profession because they're hearing all of this. Why would I want to do this for $50,000 a year and be demonized constantly for this job that requires so much and is a job? I mean, think about it. Some kids spend as much time at school events as they do at home. I mean, these people are highly responsible for a lot of the safety and well-being of children over the course. And if they're not there, where are they going to be?
Yeah, that's cool. And back to your question of, what happened, I think with a lot of those students, our former students, we are still respected. But I think it's like the many policymakers and government officials don't respect us. I think within the community, we still are. I feel like that we still are. Students say, hey,
I mean,
Mr. Steele,
I'm not defending. There are always a fair number of people in any profession that have violated the trust and responsibility of that profession. But I would say in the general sense of Indiana's public school teachers, the high percentage of them are people who are in there for the right reason. They want these students to be successful. They're giving back to their community because their community invested in them. I'm seeing, what, of course, I've taught for 34 years. When I started, a lot of your top students in a rural school thought about education as a career. Now I look like the top 10 kids in a class, and none of them are saying, I want to go into education. Because one, obviously, there's a huge amount of requirement for not a lot of pay. And so they're thinking, I can go into another career in medicine or health and whatever, and I can make a lot more money doing that. So I'm thinking, you're talking about going into the political realm, and how can we get enough funding into school districts that where they can continue to offer teachers that pipeline, because I think that's what's going to take to draw people in, and people need to know that this is so important to the development of our nation. How are our students? Because my fear, I'm getting a little political, I guess here. My fear is that the nation that we have wanted to create ever since the beginning, public education's role was to develop, an educated citizenry that could make democracy happen. Because how are you going to have a system of uneducated people figuring out how to vote and how the government system runs and what what their citizen opportunities and responsibilities are? And if we end up with two tiers of education, which we've always had, I mean, obviously wealthier individuals have always been able to give their children better educational opportunities, send them to academies and stuff. But our public education system was supposed to be the equalizer and to offer kids from that middle and lower level opportunity that if they had promise, if they had work ethic or whatever, they could be up there, with and contribute huge things to this society. And so I'm like, are we going to end up with two tiers of education, or one tier is just you get enough to get by, and here's the people who can afford to have the better quality education?
Yeah, that's a huge fear of mine too. The idea of public education is kind of the microcosm of our whole country, of being a melting pot of that. And now we're seeing, this charter school with this agenda and this where the divisiveness and the different silos that people are already in. Well, I don't want my student to learn about this. I'm going to send them to this where they can have these blinders on and have this view of, public education should be public education, truly that we're educating everybody, that we have a core sense of democratic ideals. And I think that a lot of people that are pushing this want to demonize teachers for a reason, because they see, that diversity is a bad thing. And some have that. And I think that's a good thing. I think people from all economic backgrounds and all races and should have the same opportunity for a good quality public education,
right?
And not be sourced out. And
I have a great fear of that happening, to where what we have built over time, in Indiana, we've had public education since the 1851 Constitution, came in, and that we've built this. And Indiana has, unlike a lot of states, had resisted a lot of consolidation and kept a lot of smaller schools. You go to some states and they've gone to county-wide schools. They just eliminated the idea of community-based education. And there are some downsides to that in Indiana. One of the downsides is Indiana is now one of the most segregated states in public education because of where our population tends to live. You've got your African American population concentrated in places like, Indianapolis downtown area, and we keep those schools, and so we do have segregation based on the fact that we've maintained smaller schools. But I still think the smaller schools have validity to them in that it pulls all these different elements in a community together. And in a place like Orange County, I always say, your choices are, basically you got these 3 schools, you've got homeschooling, and you could do, I guess, an online virtual academy kind of thing too. But most of our kids and our families, they don't have a lot of those other options. They're going to go to public schools. And you're going to have the top to the bottom from a socioeconomic status. We'll have kids from fairly well-to-do families all the way down to those families that are struggling just to, keep a shelter over their head. And you've got to service all of those. But there's nothing that says that kid that comes from the lowest socioeconomic status in your county doesn't have that streak of ability that can be awakened in that public school and offer that student a stepping stone to something else, because they're in this environment where they are with all kinds of people. They're not restricted to, this is the only people I'm around. So again, I think that's the beauty of rural education, is it sort of puts everybody together, and you have to live life together.
Yeah.
And so, I had a discussion with a gentleman one time. I said, why is it that, like in Orange County, we see that even those that are fairly wealthy tend to be fairly generous? We have a lot of programs and community outreach things that happen, and they tend to get funded by people like Habitat for Humanity or the Good Samaritan Fund and stuff. And he said, because so many of those people that have made it once came from this other background, and they kind of understand that
and want to
give back to it. But if you were funneled into some special kind of system and you never have to live life in any kind of community with those people, will you have that same connection and concern for your whole society? I don't know.
Probably not. Yeah.
And can a republic like America survive if people are too divided up into separate categories?
Yeah. I think we're seeing a challenge. We're at a challenging point in our country, for sure. What I wanted to run listening to teachers, because I think, there needs to be a voice in the State House of a teacher. I might be kind of a unicorn up there because I'm going to be an independent candidate. Hopefully, if I get to the State House, I'll be an independent. I'll, be able to cross the lines and do what's right, regardless of party. Because I think it's become so partisan and so politically driven. Maybe this is a naive concept, but if a good bill comes out of the Republican side, I will vote for that. If a good bill comes out of the Democratic side, I think that now things are that we don't have. I just said recently on the stump speech that those statesmen like Richard Lugar and Lee Hamilton
yes,
are kind of vanishing things. That there's nobody like that anymore that can cross that divide and be sensible and use common sense and not just say, oh, that's the other side's bill, so I'm not going to vote for it. So what I think I would bring to the State House is an independent vote and a teacher vote. Somebody in public education that is going to be fighting for education to retain those better students. Same thing for us, that we've had, top 10 students, and previously many of them went into education, but now more and more are not. So let's, recently the state did up the funding for beginning teachers to $45,000 a year, but that's still well below the national average. So we need to be able to retain our good students in our community and make them want to stay here by giving them a competitive salary. We need to, quit demonizing teachers and targeting them for doing their job, especially in history. We need to fully fund public schools and quit siphoning off so much to charter schools and vouchers. And if we are going to, I see a place for a charter school. I'm not saying that they're all bad, but let's have parity. Let's have them have the same accountability in terms of testing. If you're going to grade a school or make them take I-STEP or account for the money that they're receiving, let's make all schools do that like public schools have to. Let's make all schools, if they're receiving public money, accept all students and not close their doors to some. So I think we need equity in funding and just more funding for public education, and to get, rural schools more funding to help these programs that are the first on the chopping block in some of these rural schools that are struggling to survive. And the only way they can is to cut out choral departments and cut out art departments. And what kind of enriching education is that if we just have the 3 core subjects? Let's have rounded people and a good quality education, not just the bare minimum.
Well, sometimes even social studies has been considered on the chopping block of non-essentials, and I'm like, no, this is, of course, I'm going to put my plug in for it, because I tell people history is the greatest subject of all to help a young mind begin to develop an understanding of, well, if you get a good history teacher, you don't just focus on memorization, you focus on how we learn, how an event happens. People have to know what the decision making that was going on in there. In that decision making, I always tell my students, is a laboratory for us who can look back 50, 100, 200, 300 years. What were they thinking, and why were they thinking the way they were? And can you see those things and pick it out? And then that is a transferable skill to today, to allow you to be able to, that person that's opposed to something that I want, maybe there's a reason they're opposed to it, and I can understand that. It may not change your perspective of why you want something, but it makes you understand that person as a person, and maybe will lower that demonization, that just because somebody's opposed to something that I favor, they're not necessarily evil, and I think history, all the social, they do that very well. They help with that. Otherwise, we're going to get to the point where we can't even have a civil society.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It seems like we have our government nationally and state has a lot of money to do a lot of things that they want to do, whether it's build ICE detention centers or fund ICE to $70 billion this year, and to, do all this other stuff that they deem important, but never, we don't have the money for education. We don't have that.
Was it 2 years ago it triggered an automatic taxpayer refund or whatever? So I'm thinking, surely if there's that much money, then why is there not enough money to take care of education?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, we don't have a choral department anymore. So for our students, when they get to 6th grade, that's their last experience with music, unless they are a band student. We, of course, have band all the way through. But for those who want to sing, we don't have anything for them to do. And then so you come over, and we're trying to do drama productions, and one of the things we end up with is we don't have a pipeline of preparation if we want to do a musical. We just have to rely upon students' natural abilities to do that. And then, like things like our Veterans Day program, which I organize every year, I can't offer our public that comes to that program. There's no choral performance in that. At our graduation, there's no choral performance anymore because we don't have students having that opportunity to learn that. And music is just, it's been proven to have an impact on math skills. So you can't say that it's not kind of an essential subject. I am sad about that, but I know schools have to make, decisions as well as to where are you going to cut when the funding's not there. You got to do something.
Can't get blood out of a turnip.
No.
My grandma would say.
There is no blood in a turnip. So I don't know. That's, so what are what would be your dream for public education in Indiana?
Yeah, that's such a tough question. My dream would be that teachers wouldn't be so stretched so thinly that, yes, I loved teaching a variety of subjects. It didn't get boring, but I think at certain points in my career, and especially...
It also raises your stress level.
The first year when I was teaching government and econ, psychology and sociology and 8th grade U.S. history, it was just I was spread too thinly. I would like to see enough funding that we could support all programs, have rigorous programs, and have dual credit ed. When I left Orleans, I don't think they could offer dual credit government anymore because there wasn't a teacher that was licensed and qualified in that. So that's one of the toughest questions. If we're really, really dreaming big, I would love to see a lot more money where we're not, having to make these terrible choices of cutting programs and stretching teachers too thin, where we had sufficient funding to not only fund staff and personnel and give the kids, give Wi-Fi. A lot of times, that is sketchy. I don't know how dependable yours is, but to have good Wi-Fi and good, buildings and infrastructure, and not only, classrooms and our academic buildings, but athletic fields and band fields and track and field, that's a lot of money to do those things. And transportation, to just have all the money that schools need, where we're not on a shoestring budget, where people are, administrators are making tough choices to riff teachers and to cut programs. So the funding would be huge. I'm not a Luddite, but I do miss the days of textbooks. And when we went one-to-one to Chromebooks, some of this are like, well, develop your own curriculum. We got this online thing that you're going to, like, because they didn't have the money to do both. Right. So I think there is a place, and now we've seen, reading scores and all these scores dropping, and we can't blame this all on COVID. I'm old. I miss the days of textbooks and go to chapter 3 and turn it and look at a, because, that one of the laws they passed this year was to limit cell phones in schools. Right. Well, I think that's good, but the most distracting thing some of these kids have
is the Chromebook.
Are the Chromebooks.
Yeah.
Try to teach 7th grade where these mainly little guys are just gaming, and we're like, okay, close the Chromebook, and as much, Guardian software and things that we can put on as a teacher, they will always get around it.
Oh yeah,
And it's just
they're very good at that.
so I want to see, my dream for education is bring back slate and I want to bring back textbooks as well as Chromebooks. We need to have these kids educated in technology too, but when it comes to funding, we can't do both. Well, I would like to see, I haven't had a textbook in years.
My last textbook for U.S. history was published in 2010.
Yeah.
I still have them because history in the old,
Yeah.
but a lot of history's happened since 2010 as well.
Yeah, yeah. I kept mine before I left history, and I kept same thing.
Yeah.
I kept our last version of books, a classroom set.
Right.
And by the time I left, they were all marked up, but at least I could pull them off
Yep.
the shelves, and so much of history doesn't change. It's dynamic, but
Well, here's another big
Pearl
issue.
Harbor still was
It's still
December
Pearl Harbor.
7th,
Exactly.
1941.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
But other subjects may be different.
Yeah,
They need something
same thing.
much more updated.
The last textbook that I had in history, President Obama had just gotten elected in 2000, and it was like 2 paragraphs of his historic election, and then I quit teaching history, I think 2018, 2017. So a lot had happened. Yeah, so yeah. I developed that kind of on my own, but getting back to dream things, giving teachers starting salary where our best students, those top 10 that used to go into teaching, and going into teaching is a calling, it's a passion.
It is.
I think my first year, I don't know for sure, but I think it was maybe 27,000 is what I started out in 1996, and
a little less.
But I did it because I loved teaching, and I love history, and now 45,000 sounds a lot better, but that's still our time.
Yeah.
Not good. So I would like to see a way to retain those great kids that we want as teachers of our kids in our community, to make that an incentive, a salary and incentive enough that that's a feasible thing for them to do.
I want it to be to where that student who thinks, I really think I would want to be a teacher, I think that's my calling, would not be dissuaded by the low salary, where they think, oh, I can go over here and do a lot better. But if we had a salary, I'm not saying teachers have to be paid, but if people really knew what it took to be a high quality teacher, not just, we can have people just go in and read from the textbook or whatever, stick them online. But if somebody is really, you got people who want to do this job and have the drive, the ambition to do it, and are highly skilled and highly trained and desire it even more. Those are the people that want to go to the conference. They're the people that want to continue their education, they get their master's degree. Well, today, why would you go get a master's degree? You're going to spend all this money, and it doesn't pay off very well. So and as I always told people, the master's program in education is probably where you pay the most attention, because you've already taught, and you pay attention to this because you're like, oh yeah, that may work, that may not work. You have a background in it, and so we want our teachers to get there. And it used to be that was the goal, was to get teachers to be master's degree teachers, that they would have more skills at that point. Well, now people are just doing well just to get in there and make enough to survive. It's not, and I don't want it to be the kind of job that you're going in to get wealthy. Like I said, it's a calling. People have to want to teach. But why should they be driven away from teaching by the fear, I'll never make enough money to keep my family going, and I've got to do all this stuff to, keep all the balls juggling all the time, and the stress level goes up. I'd like to see some kind of study done maybe on health of Indiana's public health teachers or public teachers. What's their health situation like? Is the stress load high? Or what do we see? But anyway, so another reason that in rural schools you would see those top students go into teaching was it was a way to come back to a rural area, have a professional job that made going to college worthwhile, the pay-wise, the amount of money you invested in it, and then be a part of your community and give back to your community. And there were a lot of people who did that. I know we did a little study one time at our school, how many of our teachers had been like in the top 10 of their graduating class. And it was surprising how many were not just top 10, but were also valedictorian or salutatorian of their class that were actually teaching at our school.
I was neither of those.
So,
yeah.
So anyway, that incentive, I'd like to see it as, I don't have to make a hard choice. If I really feel a call to teaching, it's going to be, money-wise, it's going to be enough to give me this rewarding career that I can really go into it and fulfill the calling without the fear of being virtually poverty-stricken.
Yeah.
On it. So
another dream point of mine that I forgot to mention earlier was class sizes. I have taught some classes recently of 36, 37
Oh, wow.
seventh graders where we've had to bring in other desks and that's just not good for anybody.
No.
That just turned into a zoo. It was unmanageable. I just felt like a horrible teacher because I was just trying to put out fire, just try to stay
Well,
on
and how
top
are you
of
going to
the
give much
discipline.
personal attention to that many students at once?
At one point when all the kids, I need help drawing nuts. It's just like, okay, try your best. Just, I couldn't. I was, so another thing is that we need to be able to keep class sizes small, manageable, so kids can get a good education and not, pack all these kids in.
Especially at those lower grades, I hate to see where kindergarten classes end up being, 20, 25 kids, because I feel like that's a, place where they need a lot of personalized attention. And if we can keep that class below, 20 or so, then that teacher can really work with those, especially in those critical early years where we're trying to master those reading and math skills. If you're going to have huge classes and the teacher can't give that, or the case of teacher assistants, they can play a really, really significant role. So my wife, she chose to, she was out of the workforce for a number of years, raising our grandchildren. And she went back and she said, we're raising one of our grandsons right now. And she said, I'm just going to get a job as a teacher's assistant so I can be on his schedule when he goes to school. So it's been 5 years of this. And of course, the pay is next to nothing. But last year, the group she worked with and the teacher, they saw such phenomenal raises in scores because she was dedicated to a certain group of kids in that room. And it made the difference to have that person who was there and working with those kids all the time. So I always think about that too. What about support staff in our schools? They play an essential role as well. If we really want to see an increase of educational attainment, we're going to have to lower class sizes, or we're going to have to bring support staff in these places to help with that.
Yeah. Another dream aspect would be to work with a plug for North Lawrence Career Center. We've got, it used to be the vocational school at B&L, but we've got great nursing programs where the kids can go take the healthcare class and be pretty much a CNA after right out of high school. So being able to work with the community, that's through the school, but there are a lot of other opportunities that we could draw. They've got a great auto body mechanic repair. They've got an agriculture program there that, drawing on strengths of the community of trying to get some opportunities for kids to go that want a certain vocational path to be able to pursue that as well.
Well, it's going to be very important given the new diploma requirements that have come out. And we're having this question at our school is, this is all wonderful, but now we're talking like internships and stuff like that. And you're in rural America and you're thinking, where is this student going to get that opportunity to do these internships when you are in communities that are struggling? So I have a whole other thing outside of rural education, and that's just the decline of rural economy in general and the sucking of capital away from rural America into urban America, where our banks and our a lot of our businesses are not from our communities anymore, and corporate America doesn't necessarily care the same about rural communities the way the people who live in them care about them. And so we see this stuff being sucked away from us, and now you got the data center thing and the issue in rural America, especially here in Indiana, about the building of those. Where are the jobs going to come from? And that's the other thing that does, our kids, we're educating them, but I say sometimes we're in the export business. We educate the kids and then they're going to have to go someplace else because there's nothing here for them.
Right.
So that's another plug in for you is to think about rural economy as well as just rural schools.
Well, think of all the manufacturing and that we've lost around here, from Carpenter Bus to
Paoli Incorporated, just a number of, when I was younger, there was all kinds of places to work here in Paoli or around in the surrounding area, and now it's the resort.
Ford Visteon, but they've replaced that with I forget the name of it. This will be cut out because it's like a military contractor now, but the amount of industry and manufacturing jobs that we have lost in my lifetime is incredible.
Right.
My dad, my uncle used to work at Carpenter Bus Factory in the summers, and they, that is gone. And just I forget the name, that we had a tank, Manchester Tank in Bedford, and let's see, we PRD and Regal Beloit, and there's not. You're right. There's not a whole lot of opportunities for people that want to stay around here too, and that's sad that we're educating these kids to send them off.
I could take like the top 10 kids of the last few classes we've graduated, and they're not coming back to Orange County, and it's sad. And I've got a couple. There was a young lady graduated a few years. She just graduated from college. She's going to be an eye doctor, and originally her goal was, I want to come back to rural America, and maybe she will get that opportunity. I don't know, but it may or may not be.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. What's it gonna take? What can we do as a state government to keep those kids here? All of our kids, to have a vibrant community where you can afford live here, where there are jobs to keep you here, because this is a beautiful area.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the southern Indiana, and I wanted to come back. I went and what they call a gap year now. I thought, I don't want to be around here, you know, and I spread my wings and floundered in a couple other places, and I went to Chicago and worked and went. And I wanted to come back. I missed my family. I missed the seasons. I missed, you know, I was in Florida and didn't have an autumn and didn't see. Yeah. So then I landed in Chicago and I worked there and hated the big city life and being stuck in traffic for an hour. And I said, I want to come back. I missed, you know, lunch at Grandma and Grandpa's after church. And so, but I had an opportunity to, you know, I practiced law, and that didn't take, but I taught, and I feel fortunate to have been able to come back here because I love it. But you're right. What can we do to retain people that want to stay here? But where are the jobs? What are they going to do? I want to try to work with people to find an answer for that. Like how, in data centers, it's not the answer. What can we do? We're going to bring jobs to the community. No, it may be a few jobs, but not what we need to.
Well, one of the things that's important, obviously, and fiber has been, I think, significant in that, in giving rural America the same opportunities that you would have in suburban America, where you can have a remote business and live in beautiful southern Indiana, you know, making sure that the transportation infrastructure is situated, you know, in terms of deliveries and the ingoing and outgoing of things. And Indiana's done pretty good on keeping, you know, with the road situation, but making sure that is always forefront as well. But now the infrastructure isn't just physical. It's a digital infrastructure too that has to be maintained. And again, that's about equity as well, that rural people deserve to have access the same as people that live in the more urban areas do. And I know it always comes down to, you know, who pays taxes and stuff like that. But Indiana is a state that has a large rural population, and I think it's part of the character of this state is that we have such have had such a vibrant rural culture in the state, and I'm hoping that, you know, people going into the state house will want to maintain that vision.
I sure do.
This is important to our state, and these kids that are living in these rural areas, there are so many, I guess, advantages to them. I see them as kind of the salt of the earth kind of people. What they can pick up from living in that rural area, what they can offer to our society at large is, and it's always been the case. I mean, so many people, still in history, think about the number of political leaders and scientists, etc., who came from rural backgrounds, you know, and what they contributed to the society later on, because they had some good grounding in their world.
Good work.
I'm not
work
saying
ethic.
Exactly. I'm not saying the kid from suburban or urban America is not going to get any of that, but
they got some grit. They got toughness.
Yeah. So.